right, I think we're good to go.
Oh, cool. I am not seeing. Oh, there we go. Let's see, participants. Want that opened. Want QA poll opened, and then we can
Oh,
have.
Raul, hello, posting in chat.
Ooh, chat. I must have chat open.
Everyone give it up for Kenny, who's doing his third straight session here.
I don't need to know that. If I have crazy eyes, that's the reason why. But like otherwise, I'm glad to be here, and I'm happy that everyone is coming in.
Andrew says, "Yeah, I know. He keeps following me around."
Oh, how did Andrew find out? Hey everyone. Oh man, so many participants from so many different places. This is so cool.
How are the other streams? Are people coming from what we had Swift and CSS going on?
Yeah, so coming in from CSS, I remember people from all over the world. We had people from the UK. We had people in the US, New York, Brooklyn, Queens, Jamaica, Oklahoma. Wow, that's just pouring in from all over.
Yeah, no, this is great. Minnesota. I went to school in Minnesota. Hello, Minnesotans.
Yeah, so everyone's saying hi, appreciate it. So same thing as the other sessions. If you have questions later on, we'll answer questions in the Q&A panel. If you want to take some time right now to take a breather, get some coffee, we'll wait for a few more participants to show up. Maybe we'll start in a minute or two.
Yeah, Kenny, maybe if you want to show them where, like, which course to get into, the course that we'll be starting at.
Yeah, sure. So I went to the course page itself already, but if you need help getting there, go to catalog. And here, this will show you our entire site, all our listings. And for today, we made this special course, and it's called Learn from Home Conference. Once you click into that, you'll see the only course available there for today. If we continue to see a lot of people interested in this, we might continue to populate more and add more. So definitely let us know. I'm going to click into that right now. I've made 6% progress out of all the stuff we've done today.
You'll love to see it in a teacher, 6% of the way.
But that's because I've reset my progress just to make sure that everything is a blank slate today. That is not indicative of my preparation as a teacher.
Just giving you a hard time, Kenny.
Oh, some questions have to be answered, Alex. Okay, and so I skipped a step and I jumped straight into JavaScript. I'm gonna go back one web page. And once you go to the syllabus tab, you'll see the collection of all the courses that we have available for today. And so I'm going to the third one here. That's Build Websites, Introduction to JavaScript. It's JavaScript, right? Yes. And then I'm gonna click on the first item here, which is an interactive lesson called Introduction to JavaScript. No, not Java. Please do not click Introduction to Java. Two separate things, y'all. Okay. And once you do that, you should land on this page called Introduction to JavaScript, titled What is JavaScript? All right, it's 1:35. How about we get started with Mike? Did you want to say something before we go?
Yeah, just wanted to say hi, everyone. I'm going to kind of be in the background. I'll be off video in a minute, but I'll be helping to answer some Q&A, especially if we get really busy. But I will definitely yield to the experts you have with you, Alex and Kenny, who are going to take you through all the material. So just wanted to say hi, and hope I can be of some service in the background.
It's going to be immensely helpful, Mike. Thanks.
Oh, and one more thing, because this question has come up a lot. So we are recording all of these sessions throughout the day, and we'll post them all to YouTube. They'll probably go up Tuesday. We just need some time to like get everything together, and but we'll email you with the links. So if you're not, you'll get access to not only this one but other ones in case you're curious to check them out.
Um, Hi again. Thanks, Mike. Hi again, everyone. Just to introduce ourselves, in case you're joining in for the first time, or maybe you're coming back from lunch. I'm Kenny. I'm a curriculum developer here at Codecademy. I've actually worked on the Introduction to JavaScript course, though hopefully we'll get to the material that I've actually written. This is stuff that my colleagues have done a great job on, and I'm really excited to have you here.
Yeah, and I'm Alex. I'm also a curriculum developer. I've written a bunch of the kind of data science-y curriculum, so some Python stuff. I'm currently working on R courses. I ran the first session with Kenny on kind of creative coding using JavaScript. So I definitely have some JavaScript experience, but I don't have a ton of experience in using it in like a strict web development way like we're going to be doing during this session. So Kenny's definitely the go-to for this one.
I think Alex is selling himself a little bit short there, but we've gotten some chance of P5 from DV in the chat. Nice to have you back. I just posted the link to the session again. We haven't gotten started yet, so if you need to acclimate yourself, go right for it.
Like Mike, I will also be trying to answer questions in the chat as we're going, but I will also try to talk to Kenny.
So thanks, Alex. Most of this is going to be about you guys, all right? So we're going to learn JavaScript today. I can't guarantee how far. It's going to be part of making a website. And so it's going to be part of the journey that you will go through if you're very interested in web development. And we're going to get to learn a little bit more about the language today. For one of the first questions there from Lila, do you think it's no good learning lots of things at once, CSS, HTML, JavaScript? It depends. I think it varies from person to person. If you have the aptitude to juggle multiple things at once, then that's in your persona. That's something that you're used to. For myself, I like focusing on one thing at a time. So I've often done like, back when I was learning web development, I've learned HTML first. And then I've learned CSS, if you can call it that. And then I jumped into JavaScript. Alex, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think HTML and CSS are pretty different from many other programming languages because they're more of like a markup language, more about like form rather than function. But I think one of the interesting things, if you're just coming from Learn Swift, that workshop that we ran, I think you'll see that there's a lot of similarities between that and JavaScript. And so I do think that actually it can be an okay thing to be jumping between these different languages when you're a new learner, because you can kind of see the similarities and differences, and you see that really there isn't a ton of differences, at least on the beginner level, between all of these languages. Like you could definitely take skills that you learn in this session and apply them to our Python course, our Swift course, all these other courses. So I think it's kind of fun to jump around between languages.
Sorry, I lost audio for a second, but yeah, we're going to be jumping around. And to answer Jonathan's question, and maybe Ash Code Lay too, JavaScript is used for a lot of things, and you'll probably primarily see it with web development, so making websites interactive. If we were to think of the website as like the human body, when you started off with JavaScript, started off with HTML, that provided the structure, like the bones of the operation. And then CSS is more like the clothing or the skin that you put on, the appearance that it takes up. And then JavaScript will be the muscles, things that make it move, make it pop, make it interesting. So we'll be talking about that today. Where should someone with no coding experience start? I think you've come to the right place. Codecademy has a lot of great beginner content, and this is no exception. What is JavaScript is one of my favorite courses. I'm biased because I've helped write it, but I would put a plug for it.
Yeah, I just answered that question too, and I said Python. But you know, there's no bad place to start. One thing that I tell people is kind of like look at outcomes. Like if you can, and sometimes that's hard, but if you can figure out like what the heck is like Python even used for, or what is JavaScript even used for? Like if you can somehow get a sense of the outcomes of these programming languages, then maybe you can pick one that like aligns a little bit to your interest. For example, Python is typically a little bit more like data science-y oriented, and so that's why that's why I recommend it to people, because it's like, oh, the stuff that I'm interested in is more like data oriented as opposed to design oriented. So if you can find outcomes, that's sometimes helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Alex. There's also a poll that Elisa opened up. Thanks, Elisa. And we're seeing responses flow in. Do you want to say a few words or anything, Elisa, before we? No, she left.
Ask you guys.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm in the middle here. Have a great time.
Hey, Lisa.
Okay. And a lot of you guys are first timers. Some of you have used it a few times before, comfortable with the basics. Okay. One expert in here, here to mentor others. Thanks for the support. And let's see, where have you seen JavaScript used on a website? Mostly there. Never seen it used anywhere until today. Okay, that's great too. Okay, making a full application. Awesome. So I'm gonna end the poll there, but there's a lot of interesting responses. We'll definitely cater to the beginner audience, and we'll see how far we can get with this. And again, it's about you guys today. Ask your questions. If we don't get too far into the content, well, we also have a lot of different resources like our forum. We have a Discord channel. So without further ado, shall we, Alex?
Let's get started.
Let's do it. I'll be reading the narratives and we'll be progressing from there. If you don't want to hear me listen and you want to read on your own, feel free to mute me. I won't be offended. I probably won't even know that you did it. So yeah. All right. What is JavaScript? Last year, millions of learners from our community started with JavaScript. Why? JavaScript is primarily known as the language of most modern web browsers, and its early quirks gave it a bit of a bad reputation. However, the language has continued to evolve and improve. JavaScript is a powerful, flexible, and fast programming language now used for increasingly complex web development and beyond. Since JavaScript remains at the core of web development, it's often the first language learned by self-taught coders eager to learn and build. We're excited for what you'll be able to create with the JavaScript fundamentals you gain here. JavaScript powers the dynamic behavior on most websites, including this one. In this lesson, you will learn introductory coding concepts, including data types, built-in objects, essential knowledge for all aspiring developers. Make sure you take notes and pace yourself. This foundation will set you up for understanding the more complex concepts you'll encounter later. Okay, so that's just the introduction. Is there any questions that we can get to before we actually get started? Let's take a look. Any use for JavaScript outside of web and mobile? So there are actually full-scale applications. If you have ever used Slack, this interactive chat room app, they built it using something called electron.js. So while it's not a full web browser and it's not fully mobile, but there are mobile applications, it's its own full application in and of its own right. So you can definitely build full applications as is. How does UX, user experience, play a role in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? There's a lot of different factors going on there, right? Because in order to have a good user experience, all these things must fit in together and provide a good flow for learners, for your users to click through your site and use it.
The difference between JavaScript and PHP, that's a tricky one because they're both kind of website related, right?
Yeah, I don't want to muddle the waters too much with PHP right now, but that is a good point. If we get to, if we have enough time later, I would love to look up some documentation, some comparisons, and why one might prefer another. Though honestly, I don't have much experience with PHP.
Yeah, my very basic understanding with it, and again, I don't have a ton of experience with it either, is that JavaScript is more client side, meaning like JavaScript is running in your web browser, and PHP is more server side. So talking to like more of the backend stuff. But again, that's like a very high level description.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So what knowledge must you have about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to be able to be a web developer? Let's see. I think that largely depends on maybe the job that you're looking for. If you want to be a front-end developer, that seems to be the major skill set that you might look into. We just talked about PHP, so that might be part of the toolkit you want to use as well. Depends on like whatever job it is that you're applying for and what is it that they're ultimately asking you to do. Thoughts on that, Alex?
Sorry, I was answering another question.
I put you on the spot. It's okay. I think I answered it, but we can definitely return to any of these questions later on as well.
Cool.
And Morgan asks, can you explain a little bit the differences between web developer, software developer, and software engineer? So I think, again, it goes back to the job description at hand. Web developer is very much specific to working on applications on the web. So websites, web pages, maybe even, no, let's keep it to that for now. And then software developer, software engineer is a bit more broad. You can work on applications that aren't limited by the web. It could be maybe working on something on the server side, something on the back end, they say. So depends, it's just like broader definitions of how you would categorize jobs.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it possible to find a job after completing one of the career paths? Did you just answer that? So I don't have to.
I didn't. Maybe Mike did. Yeah, the career paths are one of the one of the products at Codecademy that are kind of the longest tracks that we have. Mike, I don't know if you want
Yes,
to.
I just typed up an answer, but yes, good question. It depends on so many factors, of course. But I would say, if you're a totally beginner and you get through the career path, a good next step might be to check out a site like Upwork to get some experience freelancing, take on some projects, you can get paid for them. And then, after you build up some experience, it might be easier to get an interview and get a job from there.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. Where do you code JavaScript to make a website? We probably won't get into that specifically today. We'll just be learning JavaScript as a language, how to use it, how to make it do stuff for us. But you can include JavaScript into a website using something called a script tag. So if you followed us back from the CSS webinar, we had a style tag that we added CSS to, and then we could also link out differently using a link tag to a style sheet that was in a separate file altogether. And the same sort of idea applies for JavaScript, where we can link to a script that's going to get stored in a different file and have that file interact with the HTML and potentially CSS that's going on in the web page and website.
Yeah, we did that a little bit in the P5 session if you were in that, but very briefly.
Yes. That's how we were able to get the final solution, right, Alex?
That is right. Yeah.
Awesome. Are we doing additional projects in the Zoom session or just running through the course in case we need to leave early? We'll try to make it to the project. I have no guarantees though. It just depends on our pace. How do we feel at the time? What are we going through? But we'll see. All right. Can I learn enough with Codecademy Pro to get a job coding? I think this varies. I think that you can definitely learn a lot, but a lot of times employees are also looking for practical experience as well. So like Mike mentioned with freelance experience, I've also been told that working on different projects and finding different things that I can apply my skill set to show employers, excuse me, that I have the skills that I need for the job is also incredibly helpful. Alex?
Yeah, I think having a portfolio or a GitHub account or something is really important. Being able to show that you've produced things in the past or that you can produce things. And I think that's something that we try to do later on in our paths in Codecademy is like start working on projects outside of Codecademy on your own computer. And so getting you comfortable with working in your own environment, so then you could maybe create a portfolio or create a website or do something like that you could show people when you're applying to jobs.
Love it. Jonathan, the difference between Java and JavaScript. Two separate languages. Let's start off with that. I don't have much experience with Java, but it's more related to working on the back end, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that Java is used to write applications and not necessarily like web applications, right? Where really we're, at least what we focus on in the JavaScript, in all of our JavaScript courses are like making web apps or web applications. And you can make Java applications like, you end up with a Java file that you can like send to your friend, and they can double click on it and it'll open up on their desktop, right? And so it's like that sort of application rather than a website or something like that.
Yeah, Aman had a good comment about the difference between Java and JavaScript is the same as the difference between a car and carpet. Same sort of idea, I guess.
It is annoying that they're so similarly named.
Well, it's like they based the name off it, right? Because Java was so popular back then. And so when they introduced JavaScript, they wanted some connotation with this super popular language. And I guess that connotation just never really left. It's a good question. Okay. I think I'll try to answer a few more before we get started with coding, unless you guys just want me to keep answering questions too. Just totally fine by me.
Yeah, maybe we can ask in chat whether you want us to like get started on the lesson itself or keep answering questions, because I feel like we can.
Yeah. Okay.
Everyone's
get started. We're going. All right. So moving on. And the first thing, let's rush. Let's start with the second exercise, which is the console. Okay, the console is a panel that displays important information like errors for developers. Much of the work that the computer does with our code is invisible to us by default. If we want to see things appear on our screen, we can print or log to our console directly. In JavaScript, the console keyword refers to an object, a collection of data and actions that we can use in our code. Keywords are words that are built into the JavaScript language so that the computer will recognize them and treats them special. One action or method that is built into the console object is the log method. When we write console.log, and we'll be doing this a lot throughout our course, by the way, what we put inside the parentheses will get printed or logged to the console. It's going to be very useful for us to print values to the console so we can see the work that we're doing. And here's a code example of console.log 5, and that will print out 5. This example logs 5 to the console. The semicolon denotes the end of the line or statement. Although in JavaScript, your code will usually run as intended without a semicolon, we recommend learning the habit of ending each statement with semicolons so you'll never leave one out in the few instances they are required. You'll see later on that we use console log to print different types of data, different kinds of data. Okay, and let's take a pause for a second there. Any sort of questions, anything that's lingering on people's minds before we get started on the checkpoints? Zoom window to the side. So
yeah, maybe a little bit of window navigation.
Yeah. Is that a little better? I didn't move it to the side, but I just made
I think
the text a little bit better. Hope that's gonna help.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Okay. And okay, let's get started. A lot of times I do like checking out how the code snippets look in our code itself and how it prints. But in doing so, it's probably gonna solve the first checkpoint for us. So if you're following along, chances are you're not 5, but we can try it out regardless. Just run it. And notice that 5 pops up. So this code example that was right here at the top was telling us the truth. Okay, not that we did ever lie to you. You should just always check on your own, just to gain that experience for yourself. Okay, let's see. Another thing is you'll probably notice that I'm not clicking run. Instead, I'm on a Mac, so I'm pressing Command return or Command enter. That just saves me a little bit of time. And another disclaimer, I have a really bad habit of leaving out my semicolons. Alex, I want to put you on the spot because I think you do too.
Yes.
So if you want to see that semicolon consistently, remind me in the chat. Otherwise, I will forget and we'll just continue coding. And I hope that's okay as well.
Kenny, one of the things that I thought might be good to show is that here in these lessons, we have the console right there on the right side in Codecademy. But if somebody is programming off of Codecademy, what is the console? How do you find it? All that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we'll dive into that a little. And the easiest way that will apply to most people, I'm using a Chrome browser. But if you right click and scroll down to this option called Inspect, click on it, and then it'll open up a panel that'll display multiple things. And two things I guess we can focus in on are the Elements tab at this right here, the very top. And it has a whole lot of information. This is the basic HTML structure of our site, and it includes all the IDs, classes, attributes. If we scroll up a little bit, we'll see that we've included a script tag, like I was mentioning before. And then in the head, like we were talking about in the CSS webinar, you'll see a lot of relationship, like shortcut icons, and we'll also have a lot of style sheets here on the bottom. The question at hand, though, about the console is right here. And there's quite a few warnings here, so I'm just going to clear it. There's this option to clear the console right here, which is the circle with the strike through it. And doing so will clear the console. And we can do the same thing that we were doing in our text editor that's on our site using this console. So even if you're not on Codecademy, let's say you're on Google's homepage, Google to Google. I don't know if you're allowed to do that.
Recursion.
It's crazy. And I do the same thing where I try to inspect the page. Even though I don't have a web browser like we did for the Codecademy site, if I click on the console tab, I'll clear my warnings again. And I do console.log 5, just like we did before. You should see 5 pop up. Okay.
Nice.
And same idea there, where I just pressed enter to run the code. So there's no run button here, but pressing enter will run.
Yeah. So similar idea. I mean, really, what Codecademy is doing is just kind of like making that whole process of like having to go into this menu and look up all of this stuff, right? Codecademy is nice because we have the output right there, but you know, we're not doing anything fancy. You could be writing JavaScript in the real console as much as you want.
Yeah, great point, Alex. So to continue going, on the next line, log the number representing the number of weeks you've been programming. This is going to take some math. Hold on. It's like, let's say for 2 years, to make it easier for myself. Each year is 52 weeks, so I should be console logging like 104. Added the semicolon in for you guys. 5 and 104. And I got a green check mark, which means we're good to go. All right, so let's take a pause here, I guess, and let's look through some questions.
Yeah, there's a question about what's the difference between return and console.log. I might be getting a little bit too far into like functions and return and all that stuff, but.
Yeah, so let's talk about that briefly. Return is a keyword that is used for functions. And a function is like a collection of code that does a specific task, that executes a whole bunch of code at the same time. With return, we won't see it printed to the screen, but the computer is going to know about it because it's done that computation and it's telling us, okay, after we do all these steps, after we do all these calculations, give this value back. So as developers, we're not privy to that. We can't see that directly. We can save it somewhere, we can store it, and we can print it out later. But console log is really helpful because it allows us to directly see the output. That becomes a bit more clear. I know that's a little hand wavy, but once you get to functions, you'll see the stark distinction between return and console log.
How about print? We had a question about that. What's the difference between print and console.log?
They're both referring to the same things in this case for JavaScript. Truth be told, while I was trying to prepare for this webinar, I've gotten used to writing Swift, and their syntax for printing out values to the console is actually called print. And so I've been writing this a lot, where it's just like, and getting an error. So I think this is a good segue into what an error is, but like printing and console logging for JavaScript is talking about the same things. While I have you here, and while we have this glaring red text at us,
Ooh.
Yeah, it's telling us something's wrong, right? Like red text, not good. And if you ever need to debug something, look at this stack trace. It's actually really helpful. I mentioned stack trace. Stack trace is just how to find where in your code that's giving you the error. So in this case, I'm seeing that it's coming from this file home slash cc user workspace introduction to JavaScript console slash app.js. Notice in the top left corner here, we have app.js, which is the file that we're working on. And it's telling me that it's on line 4. So this thing about print 123018, reference print is not defined. So in JavaScript, we don't have a print statement. And that's how I was able to remember that console log is the way to print things in JavaScript, not print.
Nice.
Clear that away, and it's gone. Okay. Any other questions that you think we should bring to the table, Alex?
Yeah, so I think last one on console.log. If the user doesn't see console.log, then why would we want to use it?
Ooh, I love using console.log for very quick and simple debugging. When we're writing a lot of code and it's not as simple as just 2 lines of JavaScript, where we're getting into hundreds and maybe thousands of lines of JavaScript. If we need to just pinpoint one thing where we know something weird is happening, then we can add a console log statement, check that the values are correct or not correct, and fix it accordingly. Great question.
Cool. All right, yeah, I think let's go on.
Let's do it. Okay. Comments. Okay. So programming is often highly collaborative. In addition, our own code can quickly become difficult to understand when we return to it, sometimes only an hour later. For reasons, it's often useful to leave notes in our code for other developers or ourselves. As we write JavaScript, we can write comments in our code that the computer will ignore as our program runs. These comments exist just for human readers. Comments can explain what the code is doing, leave instructions for developers using the code, or add any other useful annotations. There are 2 types of code comments in JavaScript. A single line comment will comment out a single line and is denoted by 2 forward slashes preceding it. So you'll see an example of that there, where the first line prints 5 to the console is the comment itself, and console.log.5 is our code. You can also use a single line comment to comment out after a line of code. So notice it looks a little weird with my screen fully maxed that way, but if I zoom out a little bit, you'll see console.log5 semicolon, and then the comment goes after the code, which also is completely valid. The other type of comment is a multi-line comment. A multi-line comment will comment out multiple lines, is denoted by the forward slash with an asterisk that follows it to begin the comment, and a asterisk forward slash to end the comment. And you'll see an example of that right below. You can also use this syntax to comment something out in the middle of a line of code. So if we take a look at that, console, and then we have a multi-line comment, but it's used just in the middle of the console log statement, where ignored is followed by another comment that says still prints 5. Okay. Let's take a second, read through a bunch of text.
Yeah, people are noticing that commenting in JavaScript is the same as some other languages. Definitely a lot of languages use similar comment structures, where it's either these forward slashes or in Python and R, both of them are using hashtags for comments. So you'll see similarities between different languages.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so that said, comments are super useful. I use it a lot of times just to debug code, but yeah, what the narrative said at the very beginning of it being highly collaborative and allowing other programmers who are working on the same project with you to know what your intentions are, what their intentions are, things that still need to be left, things that need to be done later on. Comments are immensely useful. Okay. So we'll start practicing with some of the code comments, and I'll check in with you guys quickly afterwards. But the first thing is that it asks us to practice adding some code comments. And to the right, we've been provided with the beginning of the book Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, and asks us to, on line 1, write a single line comment that says opening line. So right here, I would just add 2 forward slashes, opening line. Actually, before we do this, this is a good opportunity to show you what our personal error message is for why you're not passing a checkpoint. How would that look like? So I'm not going to add anything yet, but I'm going to run the code. And everything prints out just fine. There's no error like we saw before for the JavaScript interpreter. But we do see a box that has some red text on the bottom that tells us, that asks us, did you write a single line comment using 2 forward slashes? So these 2 different error messages are completely separate, where we're running tests on your code through these steps and these checkpoints, just to make sure that you're writing your code right. And then any errors that pop up in that right side panel is going to be errors that are related to syntax most of the time, that the JavaScript interpreter, as it reads your code and like makes sense of it, if it stumbles and there's something wrong, they will let you know. Okay, so I'm going to do it properly this time around. I'm going to write it. So 2 forward slashes, opening line, and I'm going to run it. And notice my red X is now a green check mark. Feeling pretty good about myself for that.
I want to. Can people, as I'm typing out questions, can people hear me typing in the chat? I don't want to. I don't know whether I should be muting myself as I'm answering questions. Okay, excellent. I will keep myself unmuted so I can continue to talk to Kenny as I as I type.
Cool. I didn't really hear anything, Alex. I think you're fine.
Okay, great.
Sweet. And then for the second checkpoint, or sometimes you'll hear referred to as steps. I'm more used to hearing it as checkpoints. So 2, single line comments are great for adding context to your code. Multi-line comments are often best suited to prevent a block of code from running. However, both types of comments can be used for either purpose. Use a multi-line comment so that the console log statements on lines 4 through 9 are commented out. So I'll start, if you ever need a hint, you can click on those. And it tells me the syntax again, which is / with an asterisk that follows. And immediately I see all my text is kind of grayed out. Okay, but I know that I need to end it. And chat real quick, should it go on at the end of line 10 or at the start of line 11? Does it matter? Either one. I'm seeing an 11. All right. Does it matter? Don't know. We both. Let's figure this out. Okay, so I'm gonna just run it. I put it at 11 because that's the first response I saw. And yeah, all of it was commented out. So let me see if I remove that and I put it at the end of line 10, that also works as well. So it just depends on preference, on style, what you have been working on previously, how your comments have looked before. Keeping that consistency is often things that make you sane as you work through your project and things start piling up.
Kenny, here's a good question about comments that I think I know the answer to, but you probably know for sure, is when something is commented out, does it still run in the background or use resources as if it wasn't commented out? Is there a difference resource-wise between commenting out and not commenting out things?
It's interesting. I don't actually have too much insight into that as far as what the interpreter does with it. I believe once it reads those 2 forward slashes or the / asterisk, it's kind of just ignores and it keeps running through until the end. So it's probably adding a little bit of text, adding a little bit of space to your project. But as far as it affecting the interpreter and the run speed, I don't think there's any substantial effect at all.
Yeah, I would guess that it doesn't do anything with it, just because if there was like a syntax error in that comment and it was trying to run it like real code, then you could have like bugs in a comment, and then that might screw with the interpreter in some way. So I would guess that it just reads it as text and doesn't do anything with it.
Yeah, +1. DS, thanks for that great question. Okay. I'm also a really big fan of shortcuts, by the way, or like hotkeys. So if you guys are on a Mac, if instead of writing / every single time, you can, to the right, use command / and notice that my cursor is at the very end of it, and it still commented out the code for me. Okay. I believe on Windows, it's like control / for those on Windows, if you can fact check me on that. I also use that as a means of like commenting out multiple things at a time sometimes instead of using the multi-line comment. So I can highlight both lines and command /.
Nice.
And same idea here. So if you guys are into shortcuts, really helpful things to learn. And thanks for the clarification, confirmation, guys, on Windows. Appreciate it. All right. Cool. I think that's really it for comments. Let's go on to the next lesson. Exercise.
For folks, if you're not passing the Codecademy checkpoints for some reason, there's a way, and you want to continue on the lesson with us, there's a way to get the solution code. Do you want to demo that real quick, Kenny?
Sure. I'm gonna go back.
Yeah, I saw somebody had an error, and
okay.
I feel like rather than trying to debug it right now, it might be easier to just go on to the next lesson.
Makes sense. Yeah. So also, if you guys are ever stuck and your code is completely broken, you have no idea what's going on, this reset workspace, this repeating arrow, will allow you to set the status of your code to our initial sort of default code that we've provided for you guys. Okay. I think there is 2 ways. I'll show you the hard way of how to do it, where I'll run my code, run my code again, and then this panel, this little text pops up with a light bulb icon, and I can click View Solution. There's very encouraging text to say that no way, I want to keep trying, but if I've gotten to this point, I might just want the solution to the entire exercise. So keep in mind though, when you get the solution, it doesn't give the solution just for the single checkpoint, it gives the solution for the entire exercise. Okay, yeah. That's just because of the way we store files. So keep that in mind. So I can do that, and awesome. It looks exactly like it did when we were doing it together. I'm gonna reset this exercise again, just to show you the easier way if you're not stumped, but you're short on time and you want to follow along with the live stream. Cool. So here in the Get Help panel, there is also a Solution tab that you can click, and the same light bulb appears in Get Solution Code that says the same thing. And so in this case, just give me the solution so that we can move on, and I'll run it again, and it does the same thing. Okay. Thanks for bringing it up, Alex.
Yep. Thanks, Kenny.
Cool. Okay. So data types. Now, this is when we start getting into how, the underlying concepts of how JavaScript works and how it interacts with data, information. Data types are the classifications we give to the different kinds of data that we use in programming. In JavaScript, there are 7 fundamental data types. 1, number. Any number, including numbers with decimals. So that includes 4, 8, 1,516, or 23.42. Strings, which is any grouping of characters on your keyboard. That can be letters, numbers, spaces, symbols, etc. They can be surrounded by single quotes or double quotes, though we prefer single quotes. Some people like to think of strings as fancy word for text, as oftentimes they'll just contain sentences or words that you want to include, that you want to be printed out. Boolean. This data type only has 2 possible values, either true or false. And keep this in mind, they don't have quotes. Once we put quotes around them, they become strings. So Booleans are true or false. It's helpful to think of Booleans as on or off switches, or the answers to a yes or no question. 4, null. This data type represents the intentional absence of a value and is represented by the keyword null without quotes. Undefined. This data type is denoted by the keyword undefined without quotes again. It represents the absence of a value, though it has a different use than we can talk about that a little after I finish, but I want to keep going just so that we round out everything. 6, symbol. A newer feature to the language, symbols are unique identifiers useful in more complex coding. No need to worry about these for now. And then 7, object. Objects are collections of related data. The first 6 of those types are considered primitive data types. They are the most basic data types in the language. Objects are more complex, and you'll learn more about them as you progress through JavaScript. At first, 7 types might not seem like a lot, but you'll soon observe the world opens up with the possibilities once you start leveraging each one. As you learn more about objects, you'll be able to create complex collections of data. But before that, let's get comfortable with strings and numbers. So here in the example, we have console log, and it is logging location of Codecademy headquarters, 575 Broadway, New York City. And then we also console log 40, a number. In the example above, we printed out a string. So that whole collection of characters right here, that is the string that is wrapped between the single quotes. Our string isn't just a single word, it includes both capital and lowercase letters, spaces, and punctuation. Careful on that, guys. On some of our tests, we expect very exact strings. So like missing a period or not capitalizing a letter, that can cause you to go into an error, and we'll see that later on. Okay. After that printing of the string, we have console log 40. So then we print the number 40, and we didn't use quotes. Okay. Let's take a second now. Let me talk a little bit about null and undefined. They do have their own distinct differences. We can think of null as, like it says, the intentional absence of a value. So we don't want anything assigned there. Whereas undefined, from my understanding, is often like the default value that gets assigned first before it accepts another value. Okay, and that becomes a talking point for variables, because for JavaScript, one of the quirks that you'll find as you start developing is that once you declare a variable, but you don't initialize it, you don't instantiate it, you don't provide a value straight off the bat, it just has a value of undefined. Whereas null, you need to assign that value. You need to assign the absence of a value, null, to that variable. So that gets cleared up a little bit more with variables. And with a symbol, honestly, I've never used it before. To this day, I know I've seen the documentation behind it. It creates like a very unique string in my mind, but it's often like very situational, and all of this really is, but I've not really run into many situations where I've had to use a symbol before.
We got a couple of questions about null in other programming languages. I know in Python, it's none with a capital N. Kenny, what is it in Swift?
I think it's nil.
Nil, yeah, so nil is a common one. Null is used in other programming languages as well. So you'll see this concept all over the place, but used slightly differently.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions that we can address?
No, some discussion about like the single quote versus double quote difference for strings. What do you prefer? Why do you prefer it? What do you think the difference is?
If I'm gonna be totally honest, I just like using my shortcuts. And so like if I'm typing things away, it's perfectly valid. And I think it's more acceptable to write the multi-line comments here and such. But because I am lazy, I can't just like highlight all of this and then, I can. This changes a lot for me.
This changes everything.
But what I'm used to before is just highlighting everything and command or control / and it comments it out, and then I can toggle back and forth between.
Yeah. So. Sorry. The question was about strings with single quotes versus double quotes, and like why. I think you said that the standard is, what's like the recommended use? Is it single quotes or double quotes?
Yeah, great question. So this goes back to style guides. So we've been talking a little bit about, remember that line of like, should I add this on 10? Should I add it on 11? And we both found out it doesn't ultimately matter. It's one of those same kind of questions where it's like, if we're using single quotes throughout our entire project, let's stick to single quotes. If we have to use double quotes or we're using double quotes throughout, let's stick to double quotes. In our course, we actually were using Google's JavaScript style guide. So I'm just gonna quickly look that up, and you'll notice the first link is just that Google JavaScript style guide. Other people prescribe to like Airbnb's style guide. Some companies have their own style guides, and it just lets you like write code faster because you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think, should I add a single quote here or a double quote? It becomes almost automatic, and it's kind of expected for what you're writing for that project. Yeah.
Cool.
But if we try to do this, notice that it's the same thing. It both prints hi. One case that I can think of for when single quotes and double quotes matters is if you have like an apostrophe, like I'm hungry. And we can tell off the bat that there's something weird about the syntax highlighting, right? The string is supposed to be yellow, but I'm getting some sort of orange here. And the reason for that is that our interpreter is looking at this and thinking, well, I is just its single character string. And the way that we get rid of this situation and continue to use our apostrophe is using the backslash, which is called the escape character. Mm-hmm. So it's telling the interpreter to ignore the original intention of what the quote is. Just treat it like any other thing. It's not special in this case. But then once it gets to this ending single quote, that it's that's the part that we end the string. So here I can type I'm hungry, but without this, it goes back to this syntax error that I'm missing a parentheses after, which is exactly right, but it tells me that line 4 is messed up somehow.
Yeah, that kind of comes up a lot in data science-y things, where if you're like loading in data from a different source and you can't really like, because in this example, maybe you would change that sentence to I am hungry or something. But if you're ever working with data where things are like very fixed, sometimes you need to know those little quirks of the language to get around stuff.
Yeah.
So things like that are definitely kind of like the annoying part of programming, where you're like, oh my God, why is this like not working? It's because there's a silly apostrophe randomly in my code that breaks everything. But
cool. I didn't know that was such a important point for data science.
Yeah, it's like, so you'll like load in a table and it will have like you'll like load in a spreadsheet basically, and the columns of that spreadsheet will be already named for you. So I was dealing with this recently where the columns were a date, but the date was like 4/10/20. And so that slash was really screwing things up, and like I couldn't change the column names, and it was just a pain in the butt.
Raj just called me out on my lack of semicolons, so I'm adding those back in. But also to go back to the escape sequence and the use of like double quotes, single quotes. Here we have double quotes because I know I want to use an apostrophe in my string. So I can type I'm hungry, and both of these will work. I'm just going to comment out my first one and type I'm hungry, and that works. If I add the escape sequence here, it's going to also be okay. Like it doesn't read it, it's fine. That said, I hope we covered a good amount of questions. I want to get started with the first checkpoint, and let's take a look for what it's asking. It's telling us to log the string JavaScript to the console. So if you guys are following at home, you probably did this already. I'm going to type it out, and I want to use single quotes, console log JavaScript. Remember, I'm going to purposely get this wrong. I'm going to add the semicolon. I'm going to purposely get this wrong just to demonstrate that our tests sometimes are a little bit strict, and if we're asking for a very specific output, it won't pass. So I've lowercased JavaScript, okay? And I'm going to run it. I'm going to close this error message, and I'm going to run it. And in my output, look, it says JavaScript, but the error message that we are providing for you guys is, did you spell JavaScript correctly? So because it's missing, because it's not capitalized, that S is not capitalized, it won't pass our tests. And something to be aware of as you continue to use our platform. Okay. So I'm going to fix that now. I'm going to capitalize JavaScript because that's what they intended, and run the code and checkpoint. Okay. On line 2, log the number 2011. So console.log 2011, semicolon for y'all. And 2011 shows up. Awesome. I haven't been clicking on the hints, but if you guys are coding along at home, feel free to do that. They are really helpful to give you just maybe a burst of inspiration or syntax reminder if you're stuck on something. Okay. With line 3, print woohoo, I love to code, hashtag Codecademy. And I want to point out here that Codecademy does not have an additional A. It's not Code Academy. It's Codecademy, so don't get tripped up. But let's do this. Console.log.
The number of people that that don't know that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just copy and paste here, make things easier for myself, so I don't mess up because I work here and I shouldn't be getting that wrong. Foolproof way of getting it right.
Yeah.
Woohoo! I love to code. #Codecademy. And on line 4, we're gonna print the numbers, the floating number 20.49. Okay. Oh, I did it again. I told you I was going to do it. I put print instead, and it said print is not defined. Sorry. Okay. Console log code 20.49. Oh.
Someone in the chat said I thought it was Codecademy and it worked for them. So maybe in the test we wrote an acceptance and we let it pass for Codecademy since so many people do that.
Yeah, I think so. I think this was like a combination. Okay, so I lied before, but like for other things, we're likely not gonna look for all these misspellings, and we're probably gonna need the exact output. So just a heads up for you guys, might not happen every single time. Okay, so we did it with exercise 4. I'm gonna take a look at the chat again. Jonathan Brieger, I'm just jumping around, but I see you're getting an error. If you look at that error specifically, it tells you that something is happening on line 4 and it's not expecting that token. So maybe you are missing a ending multi-line comment. I think that might be what's going on there. Alex, does something come to mind? Anything that you saw that pops up that we should talk about?
I'm not getting a ton of similar questions, so I think we can move on. I'm trying to keep up with the questions that are being answered in Q&A.
Cool. Let's see, anonymous attendee, why do you have to put console.log every time? So yeah, code sometimes is just extremely literal. If we need to tell the computer to print stuff, if we just put it on the screen, it's not going to know that's our intention. We have to explicitly tell the computer, I want to print out JavaScript first. Then I want to print out 2011. Then I want to print out, woohoo, I love to code, #Codecademy. And then print out 20.49. So all of these are sequential orders that we tell the computer to execute. And then it shows up in our terminal. That brings up a really good point about like the ordering of the console log statements. And notice that when I switch the ordering of like the last woohoo I love to code to the very end, it also prints to the very end. And you guys might have noticed that I've been adding white spaces here just to, even though the instructions tell me to do it on specific lines on line 2 or line 3 or line 4, JavaScript is actually pretty lax on white spaces. So these sort of spaces between like strings and parentheses and tabs or new lines. And all of this will still do the exact same thing. It's just, again, goes back to like style guides and how your project should look. It should have some sort of consistency so that you understand, and more importantly, other people understand what to do when they're working with you on your code. Okay. Is there a way to reduce the redundancy of repeating console log? Yeah, but it's more advanced stuff, I guess. So let's say that we're up to the part where we can store functions in variables. What I would do is something like let equal console.log without the parentheses. And then I can do something like print a. And let's just remove all of this, a comment, remove it. And notice that this works. This is crazy. And we've kind of shortened it out. If I wanted to just have it like print just P, I can do that as well. But it's, again, like normally you wouldn't see this. Normally it's not done according to how companies do it and how other people have styled it. So not something that I would recommend, but to answer your question, that is a potential way to do.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah, it's like, it's a little hacky. I will say. But it's cool nonetheless. It's just like quirks that you can do with JavaScript.
Yeah, I will say that that will probably break some of our tests, some of the like Codecademy tests of trying to get the green check mark if you do stuff like that.
Oh man, Amin, sorry for confusing you. I will try not to do any sort of confusion, anything to confuse anyone, but things happen. I'm sorry. All right,
Cool. All right, let's keep going.
let's keep the momentum. Arithmetic operators. Basic arithmetic often comes in handy when programming, so math stuff. An operator is a character that performs a task in our code. JavaScript has several built-in arithmetic operators that allow us to perform mathematical calculations on numbers. This includes the following operators and their corresponding symbols. So addition is plus, subtraction is minus, multiply is an asterisk star, divide /, and remainder is the percent symbol. Sometimes you'll see remainder as modulo as well, and they'll both be referring to the same thing. We can work through it later on. The first four work how you might guess. So we'll see the use of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And to check our math against all of it, we can just copy and paste that code directly in and write 7, 4, 8, 3. Ignore that for now. Note that when we console log, the computer will evaluate the expression. So all of these lines of code are called expressions. Inside the parentheses and print the result to the console. If we want to print out the characters 3 plus 4, we would wrap them in quotes and then print them as a string. So if we didn't want them to calculate and we want to print out 3 plus 4 exactly, I would put quotes around them. And notice that in our console, it says 3 plus 4. So that's a way to get around that if you don't want the interpreter to calculate. The remaining operator, sometimes called modulo, returns the number that remains after the right-hand number divides into the left-hand number as many times as it evenly can. So 11 modulo 3 equals 2 because 3 fits into 11 3 times, leaving 2 as the remainder. So above, we've referred to that as the remainder operator as well. And this is really helpful for when we are trying to decide whether a number is even or odd. So let's see, if we do 2, let's do 3, modulo 2. What do you guys expect to happen to show up in the terminal before I press enter? Seeing 1, 5 or 1, 1, 1. Okay, ones are probably going to catch up, so I'll just run it. And you guys are exactly right, ones. And I'm seeing a lot of ones from very specific people. Good job. So that is exactly right because 2 fits into 3 once and it has a remainder of 1. So when we do stuff like this, something modulo 2, oftentimes we're trying to figure out if it's an even or odd number. If it returns 1, then it's an odd number. If it returns 0, then it's an even number. Okay. Kind of talked through a good amount of that. Let's take a break again for questions and see what you guys have thought about.
Not a ton of questions. One about the difference between remainder and divide. So maybe if you show up just another example. And then other than that, I think we might be able to move on.
Cool. So I'm changing the number there from 5 modulo 2 and also 5 divide by 2. Let's see what happens. So in the first one, 5 modulo 2, it's an odd number. So we get 1. And then for the second one, where we divide 5 by 2, we get 2.5 because 5 divided in half is 2.5. Our scholarships, please.
Yeah, I'm answering that one right now.
Appreciate it, Alex. Okay. That said, I'm going to continue on with the instructions and seeing what we can do about using our arithmetic operators in our code. Let me clear this out. In a console.log, add 3.5 to your age. This is the age you will be when we start sending people to live on Mars. So 28, 29, 28, one of those. And I want to add 3.5 to that. And I get, in 3.5 years, 31.5. So that's when we'll be going to Mars. forward to that. And on line 2, on a new line, write another console log. Inside the parentheses, take the current year and subtract 1969. This is how many years it's been since the 1969 moon landing. Okay, so let's type up another console log. And this year is 2020 minus 1969. Run it again. 51 years since then. Wow. Continuing on, create another console log. Oh, and I guess the shorter way to do this is just like copy console log into your clipboard if you don't want to keep like semicolons. Okay, gotcha, guys. Gotcha. Okay, let's just do that. And inside, I want to divide 65 by 240. So 65 by 240. Add some white spaces in there just to show you guys. And we get 0.27, awesome, which is what our test expected. And one last console log, multiply 0.27, oh, gotta go inside, 0.2708 by 100. That's the percentage of the sun that is made up of helium. Assuming that we can stand on the sun, we'd all sound like chipmunks. Is that right? Does anyone know in chat?
What's the question?
That's the percentage. So like if we could stand on the sun, we'd sound like chipmunks because that's the percentage of the sun that's made of helium.
Helium, that's fine.
Because like, would it be that we're breathing helium in after the fact? This is totally not coding related. Maybe I should go back to coding related stuff.
Kenny, I wonder, I guess it's a question I can pose to the chat. I wonder if it would be useful to show how this relates to web dev. Like, do people want to jump to a project and show and like watch us connect it to a HTML file, or do people want us to continue along with the lesson? Because that was a question that we just got of like, this is all great and we're following along, but how does this relate to web development?
Connect.
I don't know if this is like massively throwing you off your game, but
well,
if you have a project in mind, that would be an easy thing to show.
Let's see. This is going to require us to do a little bit of navigation because I didn't fully expect this. But hey, let's roll with it. Let's see where this goes.
Let's do it.
So let's go back to Codecademy, and
you could even go into the P5 project, and we could just edit the code in there.
Oh, well, I want to show it directly as how it relates to a site rather than like the element canvas. And I think that's a good point though, but let's go through the catalog. And we'll sort by language here, JavaScript. Okay, notice that we have a bunch of skill paths, a bunch of courses, and the one that I want us to go to that is going to be directly related is the DOM.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And we will post this link in the chat.
Yeah, and, but it's pro only too.
Let's do
how about this instead? Let's just do a little bit of hacking, or so to speak. Not really, but we'll show you how the console at least works and how we can type in JavaScript to manipulate that a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So let's take a break. We'll continue to use Codecademy. We're on here. Let's do that. And I like using, so this is for you guys who are into web development, a very common tool that you'll be using, the inspector element. So let's go here. And I've clicked on the arrow with the box that is used to select a specific element. So let's focus on this. And in here, if you click on it, in our right-hand panel, let me also lower this and close out of this, you'll see that it contains the text inside. So this is more or less like basic HTML manipulation. And what we can do is actually change words and titles and strings around. So instead of calling it arithmetic operators, I just want to, let's say I want to name it how to add and subtract. If I press enter, notice that this text will change. Okay. It's not going to persist though. It's not going to last because once I refresh this, once my internet catches up to me, refreshing. Loading in all these scripts that are happening here. But you'll see that once I refresh, it goes away. So I'm back to arithmetic operators. It's gone. And so that's kind of just the first step in realizing that these elements, elements in the HTML document can be manipulated. So when we talk about these sort of manipulations, oftentimes we're talking about something called the DOM, or the document object model. And all these elements live inside the document object model. And what we can do is, typically to like including a script in here, we can interact with the DOM in the console itself. So I'm gonna go back for a quick second just so that I can get like the name of it. And I have something here. I have the class of the H1 element. So something that I can do with JavaScript is I can access the document itself. And notice that when I type in document, the whole thing highlights. That's because it's referring to the entire document object model itself. And what I can do is search for this. And I can get element by class name. And what I had before, and this will kind of look very similar to console.log, right? We're getting an object. We're getting a method behind it. So console before being the object, log being the method. In this case, document being the object, and get elements by class name being the method. Let me make this a little bigger for you guys. Getting kind of lost, not gonna lie. We'll return back, but I just want to, for those who want to satiate their thirst on like how web development works and how we can interact with stuff, let's do a sneak peek there. And so once I do this and I add an argument, we'll see that we can select this very HTML collection, this part of our document, and I can assign it to a variable. So let's title. And, ooh.
I think that's good.
Yeah. Title is going to be that collection. We'll get further along into the collection types later on, like arrays and dictionaries, arrays and objects. But since it is a collection, I just need the first element in it. And I can do title 0, and I can do another thing called inner text. So notice that this auto-populates as arithmetic operators. And what I can also do is reassign that value using JavaScript to be something completely different. And notice that even though I didn't have to interact with that element in the HTML document, I was able to do that directly using JavaScript. So,
right, so we're using JavaScript to like basically talk directly to the HTML. So we're using JavaScript to grab certain parts of the HTML and then change it. And kind of the point is that like all the math that we were doing, Kenny, can you, I don't know what string casting necessarily looks like, but can you set that, that title to the result of 1 + 1?
Yeah, let's do that. So JavaScript, I think, is a bit lenient in this, and which it'll allow it to happen. Another language is very strict, and where it's like typed, meaning that if a value was already assigned as a string, then we're going to keep it as a string and throw an error. But in this case, JavaScript's like, oh, we can do whatever we want. We can coerce and change types willy-nilly. So in this case, we set the title of inner text to 1 + 1, which is 2, and you see that right to our left.
Right. So kind of, and again, like as you're watching this, don't worry too much about having to do any of this. We're just kind of trying to demonstrate how JavaScript is connecting to websites. But you can imagine, right, whenever you're buying something online and it's showing like, okay, this is your order total and this is your tax, and let me like add those two things together to show you the total amount that you're paying for. like that addition is happening over in JavaScript, and then it's going to send that result over to the HTML, just like Kenny just did, you know, set the title of this thing equal to 1 + 1, and it kicks out 2.
Yeah, great point, Alex. Yeah, it's all connected. And once you get even more advanced, so if on your computer screen, I'm going to exit out of this. But in the top right-hand corner, notice that I have my picture, my icon there. And that's specific to who I am. It's not going to show up for you guys. It's going to show up a little differently. And in which case, it would be because your profile picture is saved to some backend, and they're taking that value and subbing it in for differently for every single user once they visit our site. There's a lot of different applications with JavaScript, so we're just pointing out a few things that might stand out to you, some things that you might not even be thinking about that JavaScript could be responsible for.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a tricky thing when trying to teach this, because it's like, you know, we're doing addition. You know, it's like, how can this possibly ever be like related to making crazy websites and stuff? But like understanding it, for me, you kind of have to have faith that the skills that you're learning here eventually will be like translating into making a cool project, because this is at least what I felt when I started to learn programming, of like, how is any of this connected to anything relevant? But then the further that you get into it, you start to see like, okay, this skill that I just learned, I can immediately see like how this will apply to a website later on. So especially at the start, you just kind of have to have a bit of faith that it is relevant.
Yeah. It's one of those things, like you have to learn how to walk before you can run, right? So starting off, we're learning how to walk first, and later on, you'll be going up beyond what we just did with that DOM manipulation and running full force, making web applications. But it does take time, it does take effort, and tenacity and willpower.
Yeah, and like we certainly do not expect people who have never coded before to like be able to open the console and grab this element from the DOM and change it like right on the spot, right? That's why we start with these kind of easier like isolated examples, and then eventually you can grow up to be a Kenny and just open the console on stream and start changing the DOM.
Do it live. Just doing it live.
All right. Cool. Sorry, Kenny. I feel like I totally derailed us, but I think that was.
No, I think that was a really good, helpful like insight into maybe the end product instead. Because like you mentioned before, when I started off doing all of this stuff and I was learning through Codecademy, I didn't fully understand why I was doing all of this stuff. And I think had someone like shown me an example of the potential applications that we can use it for, it could give you like a good insight into what an end goal might be and something that you want to strive for.
Cool.
Thanks, Mike, for sending all those helpful links, by the way. See,
yeah.
It's working busy in chat.
What should we do now, Kenny? Do we want to keep going in the lesson? Do we want to?
Well, we still have, I want to say like 12 minutes left. I want to go through some of the questions. I think we lost a good amount of people, so if there's like anything I can look into before we round out the section.
People seem excited for the lesson in the chat, so.
Okay. Well, chat, you're gonna get what you came here for then. Let's do it. String concatenation too. Show us some cool stuff. Let's move on. Okay. String concatenation. Operators aren't just used for numbers. When a plus operator is used on two strings, it appends the right string to the left string. So here are the code examples below. So we can concatenate hi and ya to hiya, and then wo, woo and ah to wo. I love to blank code. Notice here that little special space. The interpreter is not going to do that for us. So we have to, again, be really explicit with what we want to see printed out. Okay. This process of appending one string to another is called concatenation. Notice in the third example, we had to make sure to include a space at the end of the first string. The computer will join the strings exactly. So we need to make sure that the included space we want is provided, or to make sure to include the space we want it between the two strings. And here's a few examples of that explicit string being provided, where we have one with a front space, one with a back space, one with no space, and one with a middle space. And just like regular math, we can combine or chain our operations to get a final results. So notice here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate strings, and we're concatenating them all into one. Okay, prints 1, 2, 3, 4. I can also show you guys up there. Okay. This is very much likely going to be our last exercise. So let's maybe another quick pause. Let's see our, for this session, sorry guys, not to mean like this is the ultimate end, but like we're closing in on our wrap up time. Okay, let's see. Any attempts to, what type of variable? Okay, not super related, but I'm noticing at the last question asked by Anonymous, are you able to specify what type of variable is? And in JavaScript, we cannot specify a type. It's a very loosely typed language. I can assign variables to a string. And just so we can see that it's actually working. String. And then once I reassign var1 to be 3, and I try printing it again, the console doesn't give me any sort of error like we might see for Swift. Semicolons, Jesus. I'm working on it, it's a bad habit. Okay, notice that, like I said, the interpreter treats it just fine. Like, oh, you declared a variable, you want to assign a new value to that variable? Okay, no problem. But for something like Swift, maybe you guys have come to this webinar from that webinar, well, remember that typing is really important. When you declare a variable to have a very specific value, like a string type or a number type or a double type, that must be the same type of value applied throughout. So that's one of those quirks about JavaScript that either you come to love or you come to hate. Depends on what projects you've used it on, I guess. Okay, so confused. Why is there so much connection between HTML and JavaScript? I guess I want to answer that question from Joseph before really like doing what we had intended for the instructions. And like I was saying before, HTML provides the structure of it. And if you guys were in our CSS webinar, our session, you were able to see that we were able to take HTML and style it, make it look nice, make it look pretty, make it look presentable. Otherwise, you might not be attracting the users that you need to go into your site to provide funding or to click through stuff, to buy stuff. People aren't interested in super plain things. But that, without the functionality of JavaScript, some people might not actually be interested in your site. A lot of things that JavaScript allows you to do and making it interactive, let's say we're creating some sort of shopping site. When you click on an item and you add it to the cart, HTML and CSS is not taking care of that. That logic is being handled by the JavaScript that you write. So you'll probably notice that from HTML and CSS, we're being very declarative. We're saying do this, do that, and not really much including like any sort of logic in there. Once we move further with JavaScript, we can add conditionals, we can add sort of things to account for many different situations. One of them being like a shopping cart, like I mentioned, and adding that to the cart, doing the checkout. All of that stuff requires JavaScript.
Yeah, detecting events, right? When you click on something and something happens, that's usually JavaScript doing all that sort of stuff.
Exactly. Okay.
Kenny, a good question that I saw a little bit ago was we've used the term like, oh, the interpreter is doing this, the interpreter is doing that. What does that actually mean?
Oh, it's thanks for calling me out on that. It's basically like your web browser and how it reads your code and spits out information. So the engine, sometimes you'll also hear about it as an engine. The interpreter, the engine that is reading the JavaScript is a little different from browser to browser. So the implementation for Chrome is different from Mozilla. So the name for it, I think, are different. I believe Chrome uses something called the V8 engine, and then Mozilla uses something called SpiderMonkey. So if we go to this other site that I love using called Can I Use? which tells me like what exactly is supported in different browsers. That's the reason for it. The implementation of how this interpreter, this engine, this piece of software that is being used to read the JavaScript code is implemented differently across different browsers. So you'll notice that for Internet Explorer, it's partially supported. Like if I want to use the keyword let in declaring a variable. But it's supported across the board for Edge, Firefox, and Safari. But once we go to like Mini Opera, if a user was trying to access my site and I had used the keyword let in that project, in that website, they would not be able to see that variable and they would get some sort of error thrown.
That's interesting. I wonder, so this is a question from me as somebody who is not super into web development. Like, why do they use different interpreters? What's the benefit? Like, why can't we all just use the same one to?
Yeah, that's good. I have no idea. I think it's also about like a market share kind of thing. Like if your browser is able to read or detect, run JavaScript faster or slower, that could be some sort of differentiating factor. So I think it goes more to like business there, but yeah, if we have one standard and just draw from it, which is what ECMAScript is, this is going a little far into the weeds, but all the standards are coming from there and the implementations they're done differently through browsers.
Cool.
Yeah. All right.
All right, so we only got 4 minutes left. Yeah, so Kenny, if you want to start wrapping up.
All right. I think that's about it. If you guys have any additional questions in the chat, I would love to just like provide resources at this point. So I know we got up to exercise 6 out of 10 or so exercise lesson, but there are general questions or go to the forums that you guys can go to. A lot of resources, even though I haven't shown it, can be done through a quick, simple search online. So one of my favorites is Mozilla Development Network, and sometimes I'll just look up things that are related to JavaScript. So if I forget how to JavaScript declare array, I can search that up, and then I'm linked directly to the website. That can be additional supplement material for you guys as you work through our courses. A lot of these questions, maybe if you had something about string concatenation, it's one of our more popular courses. So there's a good chance that someone asked a question about it already. But if you also want to add to those questions and see what other people have to think about it, that's also a fantastic resource. I know Mike was posting posting a link in our chat about our Discord. So there's a lot of different resources out there for you guys. If you're just worried about getting started with a language, I know Alex had mentioned Python, I talked about JavaScript. I think one of the more important parts is just getting started and getting yourself acclimated into this environment.
I'm posting the link to our scholarship page. So I was surprised in our first session how a lot of people didn't seem to know about the scholarship that was going on. But if you have a .edu or .k12 email address, then you can get a couple of months of pro for free by filling out this scholarship form. If you're a student and don't have those email addresses, .edu or a .k12 email address, there is a form in the frequently asked questions section, and we should be able to help you out anyways. The scholarship is, we launched it probably a month ago at this point, and basically we are giving away pro for students and teachers until the end of the current school year. So we're doing it for 90 days. So if you jump in there now, you should get a good maybe 60 days worth of pro. So yeah, that's a good resource if you want to get some free pro. It's I'll post it again in the chat here, but there it is.
For those who are asking if we're done, yeah, we more or less are, but there is a wrap-up session back with Elisa and Mike. And so if you guys go to that webinar, we'll be able to just like say thanks really for joining us. It's been really fun on my behalf. I'm sure Alex has feelings about that as well.
Yeah, Kenny, you did so well. Good job, buddy.
Hey, right back at you, man. And it wouldn't be possible without the entire audience here.
Yeah. Cool. All right. We will see you over in the wrap-up session, guys. We'll talk to you all later.
Take care.